Hey friend, Heather Creekmore here. I'm glad you joined us for today's interview with Dr. Mikala Albertson. She's a board certified physician, but now she's an author and mostly a women's wellness advocate. And today we're going to talk about how hard it is to try to genuinely get healthy in a culture that tells us that being healthy means being thin, and in a culture that tells us we have to just keep striving and doing all the things and doing all the weight loss things. And she's going to challenge some of those notions. If you've ever shown up at the doctor and felt like maybe you were doing well on your intuitive eating or body image journey, and then you go to the doctor and everything falls apart, we're going to talk about that today too. So I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. This is her book called Everything I Wish I Knew About Midlife, and I think you'll enjoy that too. Before we get into it today though, I want to invite you personally to join us on the 40-day journey. We start this week. We do one every quarter, but it's really a 40-day journey, 6 weeks, where we do Zoom calls every week and discuss my book, the 40-day body image workbook. Now friends, this is so much more than just a workbook. Like, you could read this as a regular book because there's enough words in it, but there's readings every day, and then once a week we get together and we talk about the content. If you are tired of struggling with the mirror and the scale, if you are tired of being frustrated about how your body looks and thinking about that all the time, this is your year to get free. So join us on the 40-day journey, grab this workbook wherever books are sold, and then sign up at improvedbodyimage.com and join us on the 40-day journey. I hope to see you there. Dr. Mikala Albertson, thank you for joining us on the Compare to Who show today. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. And this month we're talking about health. And health is such a tricky, like in some cases, triggering word for a lot of people, especially like a lot of listeners of this show, because we've been told by culture and Instagram and all the places that health means one thing, and then we chase that thing and maybe we don't feel very healthy after chasing it, or it just never seems to be enough. And so you just wrote a brand new book called Everything I Wish I Could Tell You About Midlife. It's amazing. But today I'm excited to have a conversation with you about something that might be kind of controversial. But I love this angle you take in your book. But today I want to talk about why a medical doctor like yourself may not necessarily recommend that weight loss be your first goal this year. And that should not be earth-shattering, but that is kind of earth-shattering.
Especially this time of year, right?
Right. Because it's like lose weight, solve everything, lose weight. So I can't wait to get into this. But where I would love to start today is tell us a little bit about your story. I read a little bit about you. You are very vulnerable in your book, but can you tell us where Mikala Albertson's coming from today?
Yeah, sure. That's a big, broad question, but I'll try to answer that. I am a family practice doctor. I have a fellowship in women's health, so I love taking care of and talking to other women and hearing their stories and really kind of getting to know them. I think that practicing medicine has been just a gift to me because I get to meet people with a few of their layers peeled away. And that is just such a special privilege, I think. And it has taught me so much about people and humans and humanity. And so that's my favorite part about practicing medicine and seeing women. I did all of my medical training in Omaha, Nebraska, and we moved to Utah. So we're in Salt Lake City. We moved here about 12 years ago. And that's when I started practicing part-time and started having a lot of children. And as I've had more kids, I've worked less and less and less in clinic. And so my story is I worked out in clinical practice for 18 years. And then a couple of years ago, I actually quit my job in clinical practice to be an author full-time. And that's about the time that I started this book. And really, I hope from the title, people are like, what does that mean exactly? What do you wish you could tell us? I do feel like medicine has these constraints of time and also vulnerability a little bit. I sort of had this feeling like I would so much rather go out for lunch with this patient and really talk about things than have to kind of stay within like the parameters of medicine, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Yeah, and then I have 5 children. They range in age from 2nd grade to sophomore in college.
Wow.
And I've recently found out that I'm going to be a grandmother this summer, so
Congratulations.
that's another little bonus. And my husband is a physician as well. He is 15 years into recovery from drugs and alcohol use. And so my time in residency was the same time that I was a young mom, had 2 little children, and my husband was in and out of rehab. And so I really feel like that was this really defining time in my life where I became kind of a different person.
Mhm.
And I saw people in a different way, and I sort of began to see life in a different way. Like,
Yeah.
oh, life is actually really hard. And it's
Yeah.
really hard for me. And it's really hard for every patient that I'm seeing for different reasons and different parts of their story. And so I hope that writing and actually being real and honest and vulnerable just allows people to be more fully themselves when
Yeah.
they read it. Because that's certainly my intent. Like, let's be in our actual bodies that aren't perfect, and let's live these actual lives that we have
Yeah.
that are certainly not perfect. And how can we sort of muddle through together?
Mm. I love that. That was the perfect answer.
Thank you.
Let let me loop back to something that you said about the struggle between kind of what's expected in the medical community and what you really have a heart for. And I think in your book that comes through so clearly. And like as an author, I was kind of just like empathizing with you because you talked a little bit about, and maybe that's in the introduction or chapter one, you talk early in the book about kind of what the publisher wanted from you and like what
Yeah.
you wanted to do. And as I started reading, I was like, oh boy, here's a book by a doctor. There's
Yeah.
medical terms. Oh boy, she's going to have to say things politically correct because she's a
Mhm.
medical doctor and use the right terms and definitions. And you had like a little bit of your story in the beginning where it was like it was enough for me to be like, "Oh, I like her." Like, wow, like I think she gets it. But then there's these terms, and
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't give up on your book after chapter 1 or 2 because it just unravels like this beautiful portrait. I don't even know like what unravels. That's probably beautiful portraits don't unravel. I don't know. It's early in the year. I'm not all of my words aren't back yet after the holiday, but it's just really good. It's
Oh,
just really
thanks.
good. And I
Yeah.
don't say that about every book. So, um, but you are so vulnerable and you're honest. And I think this is a problem that all authors have, right? You can't just like it's like meeting someone for the first time. You can't just say,
Mhm.
"Hi, I'm Heather, and here's all my deepest, darkest secrets" in chapter 1, because that would be awkward and you would overwhelm people. So you kind of have to like take them on a journey to get to know you a little bit. But boy, by the end, you had me crying. I didn't think I would
Oh.
cry. And my husband's like, "You're reading a book on midlife and you're crying?" Like, yeah, well, it's not hormones. It's actually really good writing. So,
Oh,
um,
thanks.
so it was just beautiful. Um, But what stuck out to me the most was what you were just talking about. I could see that transformation as you were telling your story of someone who, and you have a whole chapter on this, someone who was probably high control in
Mhm.
her life, and then life just became to be too like you get to a tipping point. Like I think that's why I have 4 children. You have 5. Like I think if I had 1 or 2, like I would have still somehow had the illusion that I was in control and could make things happen. So I think God had to give me more children so I would learn, no, there's like I just do not have enough in me to take care of everything that they need all the time on every level. Like it's out of my control. And so that was really beautiful. I- let's take this to a scenario that I think most of the women listening, because I think most of us have an issue with control, right? Like, what is it? Well, what do you see? Why do we want to be in control? And you said your tipping point was kind of your husband's addiction and children and all those things, but like, w- how do you see that unraveling happening for women or even women you've cared for?
Yeah, I want to take us all off the hook a little bit and just say, I don't think that it's our fault
Mm,
necessarily. I
yeah.
think that we are taught that
Mm,
from the very beginning. And I think we are surrounded by this idea that life is manageable. We just haven't found the right tools or the right
right.
things or the right diet or the right exercise program or whatever it is. And if we
Yeah.
would just try a little bit harder,
Hmm.
then we would get it all figured out. That's how marketing works. And I mean, that's kind of how the book publishing industry works. Like,
Uh-huh.
I really had to have a lot of discussion about that and say, I can't provide a product that says, what is the problem that women are having? How is your book going to solve it? And
Mhm,
then write this thing and give it to them in this tidy package
mhm.
because that isn't real.
Yeah.
And that is like the exact opposite of what I want to hand to women.
Yeah.
And so that was actually a really hard thing to work out together. And I was so grateful that they let me or they were okay with me writing about that actual process
Yeah.
in the first chapter where it was like, we want you to write about this and
Yeah.
do it like this. And I was like, no. So I don't think that it's necessarily our fault. It's what we've
Mhm.
been taught to believe by everything that surrounds us all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't think social media and all of the ads and the things, especially that we're seeing in January, and
Mhm,
it doesn't help
mhm.
because what we're being sold is, well, look at her. She's got it all figured out.
Right.
You're just not working hard enough.
Right.
You just haven't found the thing.
Right.
And I think it all comes down to control. You're not controlling yourself enough.
Right.
You're not following the rules.
Right.
These are the rules and you're not doing it. So I don't know. I don't think it's our fault. But when we
Yeah.
can step outside of it and be like, oh, that's all just a bunch of baloney over there,
Yeah.
there's so much freedom
Yeah.
available
Yeah.
and so much peace
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
And if I'm being really honest, I step back into that line all the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
because it's hard to stay over there
Yeah.
in that bit of freedom because we're surrounded by it. We're
Right.
inundated by it all the time.
Right. Right. That's the water we swim in for
It
sure.
is.
And
Yeah.
and also I think as Christian women, like I think the concept of self-control kind of
Mm-hmm.
gets conflated
Mm-hmm.
with control to be like XYZ person influencer, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like there's this American dream concept of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you can do whatever you want to do, whatever you set your mind to, you can accomplish it, right? So we've got that. And then we also have this like Christian, like Puritan work ethic, like, if
Mhm.
you just trust God enough and control yourself enough, then you can be like XYZ.
Yeah. Well, and actually kind of deny yourself because
Right.
yourself can't be trusted. And
Right.
so you need to
Right.
like control that part of yourself because it's so bad. And it's
Right.
so, like that's where kind of obedience comes in and those
Right.
words that you're like, well, that's really confusing
Yeah.
because, yeah,
Right.
it's kind of a mixed picture that we get.
Well, because we are supposed to deny ourselves, but not in the way that I think diet culture is the label I'd give it, not in the way that diet
Yeah.
culture tells us to, because God
Yeah.
gave us signals like hunger,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Like He created our bodies that way. But it's been so conflated that deny yourself means like, don't eat when you're hungry. Like, wait, what?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
Jesus fed his disciples. Like there, it doesn't add up. So yeah, it's a tough bag. The one other thing that I kind of observed from your story, and I just feel like it resonates, is like I think a lot of us struggling with this are the type A strivers, achievers, get it all done. I
Yeah.
mean, I was reading your story and I was like, how in the world were you doing residency with little kids and a husband? Like, whoa. And that is another one of those myths, right? That we should be able to be super women
Yes.
and like you shouldn't need help. And you're honest about like kind of your struggling and quest in that as well. Like, why? Why do we do it? I mean, is this just another influence of culture or Are we trying to
Yeah.
prove something to ourselves, or is this a trauma response?
Yeah, I actually, when I think back about that time, I actually think a lot about trauma. And I
Yeah.
think I mean, for me personally, there was so many things that were out of my control that I really grabbed on to the things that I did have control over.
Yeah.
And like those were the things that I could control. And so I was going to do them like so well, because then at least I had something that was like falling in line.
Right.
And so I think that's like how I muscled my way through. But I do talk about that in when I sort of talk about my interview process and how I came to medical school the first year that Women to Men was 50-50. And I don't think sort of our traditional roles had kind of caught up. And so it was like, well, great. Like, if you want to be working, that's fine. But like, you have to be over here in this world and you have to be this amazing mom and caring for your children and doing all these things at home as well. I fully held on to that. Like,
Mhm.
to be a strong woman and to be a successful woman, I was going to have to do all of it.
Yeah.
And it took me a really long time to sort of lay down those expectations and
Yeah.
be like, oh, what can you actually do?
Right.
And be a little bit happy and at
Right.
peace in the middle of that and not just a crazy, stressed out,
Yeah.
anxious control freak.
Yeah. Well, and that
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, that goes back to the deny yourself thing, right? Because I do
Yeah.
like I think similarly, it's like you kind of convince yourself that you just have to work so hard and all these things, and you deny yourself the joy, or
Hmm.
you don't deserve rest because you haven't done it good enough, right?
Yeah.
You don't deserve, any peace or joy in your life because you got to work harder. And then maybe someday you'll arrive after you've got all the
Yes.
things done perfectly and you have a great body while doing it. Then you'll arrive and be able to rest, but you haven't earned your rest yet, is kind of I don't know, the
Exactly.
sentiment.
Yeah, that's the idea of all of it, is that like there's this finish line. So
Yeah.
no matter what it is, whether it's the body you want or the marriage you want or the work you want or whatever, like that there is this finish line. And if you just like work hard enough, once you get there, that's where your peace will be. Or that's when, I don't know, all your wildest dreams will come true,
Right,
right?
right,
And I'm like,
right.
well, I haven't gotten there yet. So
Yeah.
I have to sort of change how I'm doing the journey along the way,
Mm.
because all I've noticed is that the goalposts keep moving,
Right,
no matter how hard I work at something. So
right.
yeah, that was
Yeah,
the idea behind the book, I suppose, is like, how do we just be here today
yeah,
and take care of these bodies today
right,
and
right.
have some
I
peace
mean,
today?
yeah, it's the Kate Bowler, like, there's no cure for being human
Yes.
kind of concept. But it's funny, you said about the goalposts keep moving, or like the wellness journey, there being a finish line. I mean, I like to say it's not a very encouraging thing, but I like to say we have 100% chance of mortality. Like, we are all going
For
to die,
sure.
right? And but I mean, it does feel like there's this belief that if I were doing everything correctly, right? If I were eating right and exercising right and resting correctly, and like if I could just check off all the things on the list, then I wouldn't have any suffering. Like, I'll
Yeah.
never get a disease.
Right.
Like, nothing will ever, like, my body will just be like, it'll look great. First of all, it's going to look like a model's body
Yeah.
because I'll have done
Number
everything
one,
right.
it's
Yeah,
gonna
because
look
that's what's most
amazing.
important, like, if we're
Yeah.
honest. But then beyond that, like, I'll have optimal health. That there is this way, it goes back to control, right? That there's this way for me to achieve optimal health.
Hmm.
But you're a doctor. Like, am I in complete control of my health?
Yeah. I mean, my answer is no. There are a
Right.
lot of things that we can control, and there are a lot of things that we can't. And so we kind of have to come to this level of acceptance, I think, as we move through this journey. So, yeah, I have a whole chapter in the book on acceptance and sort of figuring out, okay, this is the body I live in.
Right.
This is how old I am. These are the parents I have and the genetics that I have. These are what my limitations are. So, how do I move through life knowing all of those things?
Right.
What are the things I can control and what are the things I can't? Um, yeah. Over the over this break, I actually came upon an accident, and I
Okay.
was like the first responder to an accident
Wow.
um, with my family. And so I had to get out and do CPR on a man until
Wow.
the ambulance came and he died. And that's the
Mm.
first time that I have done full life, life-giving support to someone outside of the hospital.
Mhm.
And it really affected me. And I
Yeah.
just thought all over kind of my kids' Christmas break and things, I just kept thinking about that man. And it really just brings a lot of perspective, I think, that
Mhm.
obviously there are some things that we cannot control. We cannot control that we're out walking our dog in the evening and we get hit by or struck by a truck and killed. And so
Mm.
how do we want to live our lives knowing that mortality is
Yeah.
like this is what's coming for us. And
Right.
I would love to have some peace in my day-to-day life and joy, as you mentioned. And I do want to be healthy and I do want to feel well in the body that I'm in, um, but not at the expense of deprivation and strict rules and, restriction and all of these things,
Right.
right? And so how do we get
Right.
that right? How do we
Yeah.
figure out that balance?
Well, because I feel like in order to do it all the way the Instagram influencers tell me to do it, like that
Yeah.
has to be my life.
Yes.
Right? I mean, like you cannot go on a lot of these programs and plans without devoting like a good amount of either actual time or mental time
Hmm.
to, calculating and planning and plotting and, and then it becomes what life's about, right? Like I got to get up tomorrow to do well on my diet and exercise great. And it's
Right.
like, is that like we're
Yeah.
trying to lengthen our lives by
To
oh,
do more
like
of that.
right, like I'm like, what's that for? Exactly,
Yeah,
right?
I
Like I want to live
agree.
longer so I can diet more and exercise more. Wait, what?
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
think we're missing our lives. Like we're
yeah,
missing our actual beautiful, just flawed, messy, ordinary lives,
yeah,
right? With
yeah,
all of that. And
yeah.
so I'm not saying throw all healthy lifestyle out the window and just do whatever the heck you want all the time and like just, right?
Right, right,
I'm
right.
definitely not saying that, but
Yeah,
I do think like let's make healthy lifestyle kind of part of real living
right,
through the hard stuff and through the joy and all of the things. So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I loved actually, I've already quoted you. You you wrote about how you haven't met a person in midlife who didn't have a little bit of a stomach roll.
Yeah,
I
it's
quoted that
true.
to a client recently. It was like, because it is, we feel like from the messages, that if we were doing things right, we wouldn't have that stomach roll, right? That stomach
Yeah,
roll is what's going to give me diabetes and heart disease. And as long as I keep that stomach roll, like I'm just on the fast track to death early, right?
right.
And it's like, but wait, but everyone has a stomach roll at a
Yeah,
certain point, right? I mean, uh, so it's so tough to not make that like the focus of my life is to get rid of my stomach rolls,
right.
diabetes and heart disease.
I like to say healthy bodies look all kinds of ways.
I like that.
And in this book, I sort of point out if you ever go to watch like the end of a marathon, or really probably that's just where I've been because my husband is a runner.
Okay.
Um, and you just watch the varied people that come across the finish line who are all ages
Mhm.
and all shapes and sizes. And they have just run 26 mile. He runs ultra marathons. And so he just did a 50-mile run.
Oh,
The ages and shapes and sizes of people who came across the finish line and who were obviously, loved physical exercise and were in great shape. And
yeah.
we don't know a lot. We didn't measure their internal parameters of health, right? But it's
Right.
like healthy bodies can look all kinds of ways. I
Yeah.
think we are missing it by thinking about thinness and health as one and the same.
Yeah.
And so, if we could just switch that little switch, I think in our minds, that would make such a big difference for so many people.
It sure would. Okay, but let me put you on the spot here, Dr. Albertson. A lot of women I work with will start a body image freedom journey and they're like, I'm feeling better in my body. Maybe they start intuitive eating, they're done with dieting, and maybe the scale does go up a little bit
Uh-huh.
because, I mean, well, first of all, I think at midlife, right, it goes up, period. But like for any woman, and this was my story, I mean, I was probably atypical anorexic for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
But when you start to eat, your body weighs more than it does when you are not eating.
Yeah.
Correct. That's kind of basic, right? Um, so a lot of women will come to me and they'll be like, I was doing great. And then I went to the doctor. And the doctor noticed that I gained weight from my last appointment. And the doctor told me, even like for my midlife people, my doctor told me, hey, now that you're 50, you really need to watch it, or you would be doing better if you just, could just lose 20, 30 pounds or whatever the number may be. Can can you shepherd those women
Yeah.
that are saying this just happened to me?
Yeah.
How I mean, of course, doctors are trained with science and data but what's missing in that equation? Can you help us out here?
Yeah. Well, I first just want to say I'm sorry about that. And I'm sorry that that's happened to you. And I'm sorry that I think there are lots of providers who maybe aren't on the same page. And it's okay to shop around a little bit for a provider that you feel comfortable with. So I actually have had this experience myself as a patient
Mm.
myself. And I just wrote something about that. I think it was actually maybe a year ago now. I wrote my apology to um, people as a medical provider and for saying, I'm so sorry that you come to the doctor, we measure your BMI and like that you get that because that was exactly the experience I had.
Mm.
So I also have been someone who has not fed myself well for my whole life and who would definitely fit into disordered eating, but who maybe didn't quite fit into like an eating disorder,
Mhm.
but was like real close to
Mhm.
being an eating disorder, but never quite, right? So, and I would say I only learned to really feed myself in the last few years, which is a really sad admission to make, I think, because I'm seeing patients and I'm writing advice and I'm talking to people about health. And then I would turn around and mistreat myself in all the worst ways, especially around food.
Yeah.
So I also am just learning how to feed myself and learning to practice intuitive eating. And in doing so, gained 10 or 15, maybe 20 pounds. I feel like I overcompensated a little
Right.
bit because it was like, oh, I can eat now. Yay,
Mhm.
yay for me. Food is so good. And then I sort of settled into
Yeah.
my set weight point, which I've been at probably now for well over a year, maybe two. And it's not the weight I would like it to be if I were still living in like, you know, beauty culture, diet culture
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I
Okay.
get that. Yep.
So I went for my wellness exam and I actually decided I was not going to look at the scale. I was just going to hop on there and I just
Yep.
kept chit-chatting to the nurse and talking to her about whatever because I felt so good and I was just doing great. Like, and the whole appointment went great. And she said, you're doing great. And my blood pressure was at goal and, all the things. Got my blood drawn. But then I got my little printout at the end.
That
And
dang
so,
printout.
dang
Yes.
it. Yeah. And so I got my printout and like, it tells you this is your weight and this is your BMI. And it even had like a little color code,
Oh
right?
yeah. The red.
And I'm like, well, I don't want to know that because then the whole drive home, I just thought, oh my gosh, you're in the red. You can't be in the red. Like, what are you doing to yourself? This is a terrible idea. And I went back through all of that stuff. So I'm so sorry that you have had that experience, if you've had that experience. And I can 100% empathize with that experience. And I think we're doing that wrong. I think we're missing that part in medicine. And I'm sorry that it is still that way.
So how would like you walked yourself through it mentally? I mean, I've done the same. I think it's challenging for those of us who have, I'm going to use this terminology, like kind of trusted others to tell us how our body should be for so long, right? We've kind of given away
Yeah.
our agency, right? Like if you're an influencer who's got a great body, you know more about bodies, you know more about my body and how it should be than I do. So I'm going to do what you tell me to do. And I hope that I'll look like you. And I think we do the same thing when we go to the doctor, right? Like we may have
Mhm.
turned off all those influencer voices, but it's like, but my doctor, I mean,
Yeah.
my doctor's their responsibility to tell me whether or not I'm healthy. And it sure
Yeah.
does sound like they're telling me I'm not healthy. And then it's just this confusion, which you just kind of named. But before we got on today, I was just kind of thinking about, for me, my reality is like I eat 2 breakfasts now. I mean, I will eat when I wake up and then I eat 3 hours later because I've just found
Yeah.
for blood sugar regulation, it's better for me to eat every 3 hours. But
Yeah.
like that's an anathema to me because I was the person who didn't eat till 12. If she can make it longer, that was like a crown I was going to get in heaven for not being able to eat
Right.
very much, right? Um, but reconciling, like I feel so much better now that I'm eating.
Mhm.
And then the doctor's telling me, no, you're unhealthy. Like, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
I mean, because the answer
I
isn't don't trust doctors,
Right. And I
but
do think that there is this balance of, I wonder. So here's maybe I don't know is my first answer to that. And it's really hard. I do think it's really good to be very, very honest with your provider
Mm,
and to find someone who fits for you. We do that with a therapist, right? We wouldn't keep
right,
going to a therapist who makes us feel crappy every time we go see them.
right.
So it is okay to say, I didn't mesh very well with that person and I'm going to try someone else. Like that's okay to do.
Yeah,
But I think saying, hey, I've really struggled with eating in the past and this has been an issue for me. And I wonder if we could work together on that or, just to let them know to
yeah,
be just to be a little more sensitive around that.
yeah.
I will say that I don't know what my answer would have been if my cholesterol was high
Mhm,
suddenly, or my blood sugar was high
mhm,
suddenly. And so I had this like confirmation that, oh, look, I'm eating. My weight did this. That made me unhappy. But then when all my labs came back, like all my internal parameters looked pretty good. Like I'm not
mhm.
pre-diabetic. My blood pressure's okay. My cholesterol is okay. So I don't know quite where I would be if I fell in that, if that makes sense.
It does. It
Because
does. I guess so. I would ask you then, as a doctor, right? Aren't there other things that could drive some of those internal parameters of health other than just my food or even my food
100%.
and exercise? Because I
Right.
feel like so so my intuitive eating journey didn't really start that much, more recently than yours. I'd say I'm probably like 3 or 4 years in.
Yeah.
And so did the pendulum swing to like the foods and then like, oh, maybe we need to eat a little bit, be a little
Yeah.
bit more conscientious, right? But around the same time, like my cholesterol, it went up and I was 1 point away from that pre-diabetes line.
Hmm.
Um, but my doctor was kind of like, yeah, but you're also entering perimenopause and
Yeah.
cholesterol rises as
Yeah.
estrogen lowers. And she's like, I'm not going to freak out about any of this.
Right.
And then, like a year later, blood work was better. And then also just thinking about, stress. And so, in addition to hormonal changes and perimenopause and all the things, stress, life changes, all those
Hmm.
things. So I just wonder if you're in the scenario, you go to the doctor and the blood work isn't awesome. Is that when you're like, absolutely, you better try a low carb diet? Or could there be a
No.
bigger picture there too?
Yeah, I think there's a bigger picture there, but it is the time to say, hey, let's look at how you're feeding yourself.
Mhm.
Let's look at, are you moving every day? Are you getting some exercise? What's your sleep looking like?
Yeah.
Do we need to do a sleep study? Do you have sleep apnea that can like drive some of those numbers up? And so I just want to say that when we do bring up some of those issues, I hope it can come in a way of let's look at this big picture. Let's look at all the healthy lifestyle kind of scenarios
Yeah.
and let's see if we could make some small changes in any of those. We don't need to hone in on, well, time to lose 20 pounds. Um, and bringing up those, because I have been sitting with a woman when her face sort of falls. And it's like, I know, I got to do better. I got to eat better. And it's not meant necessarily to be a criticism.
Mhm.
Let's look at these things and where could we work together on some of those things?
Yeah.
Because I know it does feel like, I know I haven't been doing those things and what a loser am I, right? And that
Mhm.
isn't the intent to
Yeah.
say, yep, loser, you got to lose weight, right? Like
Right.
it's
Right.
how can we work here? It's the
Right.
same face that I think I've seen mothers have when they bring their children in for a well child check. And we are going through some of the, oh, are they, can they bring two blocks together and pass from hand to hand? And they're like, no. I mean, it's not a criticism. It is just,
Uh,
hey, here's kind of where kids should be.
yeah.
And if you're not there, that doesn't mean anything is wrong or you're a
Right.
terrible person. It just is kind of some general guidelines that we're looking at, right?
Right.
It's
Right. So
kind of the
yeah. So
same idea.
we read the shame into it
Yes.
because of our expectations for
Yes.
ourselves.
Well, and maybe
Yeah.
we've heard it before because maybe
Yeah.
it has come with shame, or,
Mhm.
we've definitely heard that before.
Yeah.
But I think there is a way to work together with your provider in a way that has no shame. But I think it also takes you being really honest and
Mhm.
saying, this has been really hard for me.
Yeah.
I'm very, I need help here in a little bit different way.
Yeah.
It's like when I go to the dentist and I tell the dentist to treat me like I'm 10 years old when I have a cavity because and he really does. Like we put cartoons on.
Uh-huh.
I put the
That's
earphones
hilarious.
on because I'm like,
That's
please,
hilarious.
I don't like to come here. And he does, he's very sensitive to that. So yeah.
I love it. I
I
love it.
think it's okay to say, hey, I've had this happen before and it was really hard for me and it made me not
Yeah.
want to come to the doctor.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, you had a really beautiful story in your book about the woman who had a lot of trauma going on in her life and she was still smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And you made this statement, something about like addressing her smoking cessation was probably not like the highest priority because she already knew she needed to stop smoking.
Right.
And there's other stuff going on. And I just felt like that translated, could translate, I guess I should say,
Yeah. To
perfectly
everything.
to everything, right?
Yes.
Can you fill that out a little bit more?
Yeah. So, yeah, this particular woman was, had a lot of childhood trauma, then went on and got married to someone who was also abusive and had really just lived in trauma her whole life. And she was very new to living on her own and sort of, you know, earning her own salary and taking care of her daughter and doing these things. And she came to see me because she was having her yearly exam, but she was so excited and was telling me about how they bought this old camper and they had been camping all summer and they just loved it. And she was just beaming, like she was just so excited, like, oh, Dr. Albertson, you got to hear what we did this summer. And I just thought, I just wanted to tell that story because this is a woman who was thriving
Mm.
in her body with her experience. And was she the pillar of health? No. And
Mm.
is that the time that I should say, well, that's really awesome, but you should probably also be losing weight and quit smoking and do all these things, right? Like
Yeah.
it just wasn't. And I've
Right.
had that experience multiple times where someone's like, I know I got to quit smoking. Like, what can we do? And then when we talk about it, it's like, well, gosh, you're going through a divorce right now and you're like in
Mm.
between jobs and you've got all these things going on. Like, I don't know if quitting smoking is your top priority right now.
Mm.
And maybe it's okay to like give yourself the grace that I'm going to think about that for a while. And
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe like put in place some other things that could be good support and then kind of push that off. And let's talk about it again in 6 months and
Yeah.
just see where I'm at.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean like, no, you shouldn't quit smoking, but like, why decide that that's the time to do this other thing when it is likely a setup for failure?
Right.
And not just say, hey, like, I know I want to do this, but currently that's not my top priority.
Yeah.
And so let's revisit it again
Yeah.
later.
Which, yeah, it feels like that applies perfectly to dieting too,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Right.
I mean, there are just certain things we walk through, right?
Yeah.
Where we have to give ourselves grace. Like, you lost a family member, or you are moving, or
Yeah.
there's some other trauma in your life.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, is that even healthy for our bodies? to restrict them the nourishment they need. Well, really ever, but like,
Right.
especially when we're going through stress. I mean, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. And I don't think that means that you shouldn't think at all about what you're eating,
Right.
just
Sure.
overdo
Sure.
and binge and all those
Because that's not
things.
going to feel good. Right.
That's not going to feel good
Yeah.
either. But I think it's taking away guilt and shame and
Right.
just really looking at yourself with some compassion and saying, this is what I need right now to feel good.
Yeah.
And I think that can apply to really anything. Maybe you need to drink more water. And is it really like going to be good for you to decide, I'm going to drink 64 ounces of water every day and I'm going to have this thing, I'm going to measure it and I'm going to watch it go down and put the mark at the top. And, there's all these things we do. Or like maybe just go get a glass of water right now, right? Or exercise, like, oh, I got to come up with this big elaborate plan. I'm going to sign up for this race and I'm going to do it down the road. And then you sort of fail at it, right? Like,
Right.
because you've set up this big expectation when
Yeah.
really like you just are like, you know what, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk right now.
Right.
um, I just think we need to take away the pressure,
Yeah.
and the stress of it all. And I think self-compassion is like the best way through
Yeah.
any of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you talk about kind of self-compassion, but maybe kind of where we learn not to be compassionate with ourselves, perhaps in your book, in the chapter on body image, on loving the body you actually have, you say, we were taught nothing about health from the inside out, nothing about intuitive eating or trusting ourselves to think critically about how to care for our bodies with reasonable exercise and a variety of foods in moderation without guilt or shame. And instead, we were repeatedly blasted with comments our parents or neighbors or teachers or friends made about their bodies or even our grown bodies, alongside marketing ads featuring ideal bodied, eternally young women with firm thighs and smooth foreheads. Those ads peddling retinols and ceramides and replacement shakes and cool sculpting, all in the name of beauty and wellness. For many of us, it became terribly distressing that our own bodies were such an ordinary disaster. Oh, what a great line that was, Mikala. And
Yeah.
I think that's the heart of it. How do I believe that my body is not an ordinary disaster? How do I change my belief around that? And then, I mean, that's what we walk women through here with all the programs we do compared to who. But then it's like, what seems to happen is they hit this wall, and it's like, yeah, but if I believe my body's not an ordinary disaster, I'm going to be unhealthy. But that's just not true, is it?
Yeah, it's just not true. And I wish that we could say instead, I just, how do we change that? I just even hearing that, I'm so sensitive to it still because I have a little girl now. So my
Mhm.
youngest is a girl
Okay.
and she's 8. And it's just been interesting to notice what happens at around 8 or 9,
Mhm.
right? When like suddenly I think you're sort of aware of, oh, and just to watch her experience it, and I just so badly want it to be different for her than it was for me
Yeah.
around body image and weight and beauty.
Mhm.
And I just think people are so beautiful,
Mhm.
and it has nothing to do with their weight.
Mhm.
It's just so, have you ever just seen this like striking person that you're just like, wow, how do we change that for
Yeah.
our girls? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and I do want her to be healthy.
Mhm.
And there is like this little piece of me that's like, maybe she won't have this problem.
Mhm.
Maybe she'll just be one of those like thin people that just never has to worry, right? And then I'm like, no, you're still doing it. So
Right.
I
Right.
think it's something we wrestle with our whole
Yeah.
lives, and we will butt up against that exact messaging that I just wrote about, like
Yeah.
our whole lives. Um, and I think remembering healthy bodies look all kinds of ways, and healthy
Yeah.
bodies are the kinds of bodies that eat food and
Mhm.
exercise for fun and
Mhm.
pay attention to our cues. Like, what does
Mhm.
my body actually need right now? Oh, like I have
Yeah.
to go to the bathroom. I should run in and go to the bathroom. Or, oh, I'm a
Yeah.
little bit cold. I should go put a sweater on.
Yeah.
I was like the queen of ignoring all bodily cues.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, like, because I didn't matter. Like, what
Right.
mattered was all the work and all the things and that I was doing, and I was always like dead last.
Yeah.
But I think we sort of learn to change that and learn what real health is
Mm.
when we are paying very close attention to those bodily
Yeah.
cues and responding to them in a loving
Yeah.
and compassionate way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But
good.
again, I think remembering that, gosh, this is not yet another goalpost
Right.
that we arrive at and then we stay at and we've reached the finish line, right?
Right.
It is kind of an ongoing process. And it is okay to fall back and say, hey, you're doing that thing again. That
Yeah.
thing you just said about your daughter and wishing she could just be a thin person and, not ever
Yeah.
have to have this struggle is exactly that
Right.
same thing again,
Right.
right? And
Right.
then saying, oh, okay. So I think it's just something we'll work at
Yeah.
always. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe the way to summarize that is it's going to be messy.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that that's one of the lies of diet culture is diet culture tells us it doesn't have to be messy. All you have to do is just follow these 5 rules and then you're going to have this body and life's not going to be messy anymore. It's going to be
Yeah.
perfect and awesome and sunshine and rainbows because you're going to have this body and whoo, things are going to open up for you, girl. Like,
Yeah.
then you can rest. Right. But it's like, no, it's just messy, And I mean, I work with the CrossFitters who, go so intense for so long and they get the body until they get the knee injury from squatting so heavy. And then
Yeah.
they can't do anything for a year, right? And then they're like lost because that was their thing. Or, I mean, just so many different variables in life, right? You're following the plan, you're eating awesome, and then tragedy happens. And you don't have that kind of time or capacity to, meal
Hmm.
plan, like all of those things. And it's not sustainable because life is unpredictable. And
Yeah.
I think giving space for life to be messy,
Yeah.
um, that sounds healthy to me.
That sounds healthy. And actually, it is really beautiful in those
Yeah.
spaces. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like the messiest, hardest, most terrible parts, like this little bit of beauty comes through and it like
Mhm.
takes your breath away, I think.
Yeah.
And you're kind of missing that if you're not just right there in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I hate that and I love that all at the same time, you know?
Absolutely. Because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of my controlling friends, because I was in that camp solidly.
Hmm.
And it's really scary to think about life being messy and not being in control and things being unpredictable. Right.
Yes.
But then like that's reality. Like we're just kind of fooling ourselves if we think it's any other way. Like you actually wrote it out. I've heard it said this way, like draw a circle around everything you can control. And it's like you just draw a circle around yourself. Because
Yeah, pretty
that's it.
much.
But even in that, right? Like I can't make my thyroid work better.
Right.
Like, I can't be like, hey, heart, could you like chill out and not beat so fast sometimes? Like, I don't have
Right.
that
Even
kind of
within
control.
that circle is
Yeah.
small.
Yeah.
So, like you don't control your family history,
Right.
right?
My
You
genetics.
don't
Right.
control, yeah. So there are a lot of things
Yeah.
um, there even that you can't
Yeah.
control. I always think it's interesting that thoughts gets put in there. Like you can
Mm,
control your thoughts.
mm.
I don't know. That's something that I've worked with my therapist a little bit
Yeah.
on because you can and you can't,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
she's been so good at teaching me like first thoughts, those automatic thoughts
Right.
are kind of uncontrollable. And it
Yeah.
is okay that you have those. Like it
Right.
doesn't mean because I get so frustrated thinking, why do I do that? Why do I jump to that so quickly? Why
Right.
is that my first thought? And she'll just say, because I don't know,
Yeah.
those are your first thoughts. You don't
Right.
have a lot of control over those. But what you do have control over is like when you realize them
Yeah.
and you sort of name them and talk about them and move on. So,
Yeah. That's
um,
good.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think
That's
that's
what we talk
really
about too. It's, yeah.
helpful.
What do you
Yeah.
do with the thought is really what
Yes.
matters. You can't maybe stop it from coming, but what are you going to do when it comes? How do you treat it? That kind of thing. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. There's one thing that came up in the webinar that we did first week of January, where I was kind of talking through some of these strategies to just be healthier in the new year. And one of the things that came up was stress. And I just kind of mentioned very casually that I just read your book And you talked about completing the stress cycle, which is something I hadn't heard of before. And I know it's someone else's research,
Yeah,
but
it
I would
is.
just be remiss because I mentioned at the webinar, we had lots of questions about it. Can you just kind of talk about that for just a minute here?
Yeah, well, I'm going to just talk about stress as, it affects all organ systems of our body. And uh, stress can be good, right? And
Mhm.
our response to stress can sometimes be good. It is there for a reason. It has like a function, right? But we don't want to get caught in like chronic stress. And
Mhm.
so completing the stress cycle really comes in that chronic stress that we're in. People are loving talking about cortisol and
Mhm.
cortisol hormones these days, but
Cortisol
cortisol
face.
also, yes, cortisol is actually it's necessary, right?
Mhm.
And so it has a function. It does this throughout the day. It goes up and down. You have a second high, and then, you're supposed to have some cortisol, right? Anyway, um, but I'm going to give all the credit to that beautiful book called Burnout by the
Okay.
Nagoski sisters. And they write about completing the stress cycle, and they write it in such an approachable, just such a accessible way, that's why I wanted to mention it in the book. And so basically, when you're in a stressful situation, let's say you have a boss that you don't like at work, or something happened at work, and you can feel yourself stressed, right? And your body does all the things it's supposed to do in response to stress. Your blood pressure rises, and you sort of divert away from digestion and all of those things. Um, but if you're unable to sort of complete that cycle, that's where the trouble comes, when you get kind of stuck there.
Mhm.
And so they're awesome at explaining how to complete that cycle.
Yeah.
And it's really easy things that we can do. We can go for a walk after work and like really get our arms pumping and just sort of fume about it a little bit, just like
Mhm.
go like work it out. Um, Spending time with friends, like actually venting or talking it through, can actually be really helpful. Different modes of creative expression can be really helpful. So maybe that's music, or maybe it's painting or writing or art or something like that. And so um, I just love the idea of being conscious of, again, I think
Mhm.
it comes back to those cues that your body gives you, that
Right.
"Ugh" feeling you have after work, or
Right.
whatever it was that you were in contact with, and saying, I am feeling this way. How can I complete the cycle and sort of move through it?
Yeah.
Because probably that same boss is going to be there tomorrow, and it's going to be back again. So that was
Yeah.
the other great thing they talk about in their book, is like, this isn't a one and done thing. It's sort of a pattern that you have to set into your life,
Mhm.
to be aware of, and to kind of complete those loops whenever you need them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so again, there's no finish line, but
Right.
there are these tools available to us,
Yeah.
to sort of to get there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
That's
a
good.
wonderful book. I would recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out. That's really good. Well, I'm just thinking like we have so much data about ourselves, right? Like we are
Yeah,
so self-aware, right? I can tell you things about my personality. But I could also tell you, like what my heart rate is now. And I, can do an EKG on myself with my Apple
sure.
Watch. And, I can tell you all these things. But, you mentioned it a couple minutes ago. Like I had the same journey where I was like, I was going to the kitchen when I had to go to the bathroom
Yeah.
because I knew something, like I knew I was unsettled. I knew I had to get up from my desk and go do something. And it's really just been through my intuitive eating journey that I've actually been able to realize, oh, I go to the kitchen when I have to pee. Because
Yeah.
I'm like, I go to the kitchen to like, okay, eating's going to calm down and solve whatever it is. But then it's like, oh, wait, no, that's not going to, eating's not going to solve
Nope.
that. Right. So, like, listening to my body and then listening when I'm stressed. And I mean, I found so much, I don't know, comfort slash relief in the naming concept,
Yeah.
right? Saying
Mhm.
this is, oh, I'm stressed because of XYZ. And just even naming it. Okay, now I can breathe because now that I know what it is, it's like I
Mhm.
can see it, identify it, and it's like, oh, well, that's not a scary tiger. That's
Yeah.
just a
Or
boss.
yeah, or the permission to say, because I think we're often like, why am I feeling like this? I shouldn't be
Hmm.
feeling like this. It's not that big a
Yeah,
deal. Like, you come here every day. He's always
right,
like that. But
right.
to just say, oh, like, there's the permission. Yeah, he
Yeah,
is being kind of a jerk right now. It's
yeah,
okay that you feel that way. This is a normal bodily response that you are
right.
having to
Yeah,
what was a stressful situation. And
yeah,
then what are you going to do about it? Yeah.
yeah.
Mine is I eat when I'm really tired.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
at night, when I probably should just walk up to bed and lay
Hmm.
down and go to
Uh-huh.
sleep, I'm
Yeah.
like, I feel like I need something probably food,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I learning to name
Mhm.
what it is you're actually feeling and the
Yep.
cues that you're actually getting.
Yep.
Sounds like it should be really easy or intuitive, but it's actually
No,
not. Yeah.
no, no, it's not. And I do that in the afternoon. Like I think I used to just power eat through like that little slump I would have in the
Yeah.
afternoon. And instead I'm like, I'm gonna go lay down for 10 minutes, just
Mhm.
10 minutes. And it's like, oh, okay, now I can go on with my life.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, that afternoon slump actually does follow your cortisol levels. If you actually look at what a normal cortisol does in the day,
Uh-huh.
you have like an afternoon slump in your cortisol, and then you have a slow rise in the evening. And we feel that exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think by 5, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Feeling
I can
pretty good
accomplish
again.
things now. It's a shame I'm not
Yep.
working now. I can get stuff done.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, this has been so good. There are so many different other things I probably could talk to you for hours.
Yeah, I feel that too.
But your book is called I'm going to hold it up for my YouTube audience. Everything I Wish I Could Tell You About Midlife, A Woman's Guide to Health in the Body You Actually Have. And so if you are a woman in midlife, it's a great book. I mean, you've got the technical stuff in here that I think for some people is going to be super helpful, right? I mean, I always, I get cycle stuff mixed up all the time. I'm like, oh, is
Yeah.
it luteal? Feel like I don't know which phase is which phase, that kind of stuff. But you've got some of that stuff in here too. But you also just have some really beautiful stories, and your own story is just really beautiful. And it's an encouraging book that I think will leave you feeling like, oh, I'm
I'm
okay.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you did a
That
good
was
job
my
with it.
hope. Yeah. And I hope that you can read it all the way through once, and then you can sort of just keep it as a reference. So then when
Yeah.
you do go to the doctor or something comes up, you can sort of turn to the technical things and be like, what'd she say about that? Oh
Right.
yeah, that's what that is. What are my hormones doing? So you can sort of pick and choose from those parts what apply to you or what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. You did a great job with it. I loved it.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. Will you tell everyone where they can connect with you? I know we can get the book wherever books are sold, but
Yep,
what's
the
your
book.
website and where can they
Yeah.
connect?
Yeah, the book is everywhere. I have a website, MikalaAlbertsonMD.com, and that's probably the best place to find me. I love
Okay.
sending out my little monthly love notes with a little bit of a story and often a podcast episode, recipes I like to include there just for fun, and books I'm reading. So that's probably the best place to find me. I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Mikala Albertson MD as well.
Awesome. And I'll put all those links in the show notes too. Also, I
Okay.
think I want to link to that apology you
Oh,
mentioned. I think that
yeah.
would be
Yeah.
good. So I'm
I
going to
can
find
send
that. And
that to
yeah,
you.
that'd be
Yeah.
great. We'll put that in the links too. I think everyone would like to read that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, it's hard to be the patient. It's really hard to be the patient. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I'm sorry.
I think that'll warm some hearts. So thanks for
Yeah.
writing that. Well, again, Mikala, thanks so much for being on the show today. And thank you for watching or listening today. I hope something today has helped you stop comparing and start living. Bye bye.